Somewhere deep beneath the Iranian desert, a countdown begins. Engineers in hardened bunkers exchange final glances. A missile longer than a Boeing 737, heavier than anything this regime has ever dared to launch, sits coiled in its silo like a sleeping giant waiting to wake the world. What happens in the next 90 seconds will send shockwaves through every military command center from Washington to Tel Aviv, from London to Beijing. This is not a drill. This is not a test of nerves. This is Iran drawing a line in the sand with fire. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the channel. What you are about to hear is not speculation. It is not geopolitical theory dressed up in dramatic language. What you are about to hear is the documented, verified, and deeply alarming reality of what Iran just did, and more importantly, what it means for every single one of us watching from the comfort of our homes thousands of miles away. Because here is the brutal truth that most mainstream coverage glosses over. When a nation the size of Iran fires its most powerful missile in history, the tremors don't stay in the Middle East. They travel. They reach NATO planning rooms. They alter Israeli defense postures overnight. They force American carrier groups to quietly reposition in the dead of night. And they send a message that every defense analyst from Langley to London is scrambling to decode right now. So let's decode it together. And stay with me, because in the next few minutes, I am going to walk you through not just what happened, but why it happened at this precise moment in history, what the technical specifications of this missile actually reveal about Iran's true capabilities, and what military insiders are privately saying about what comes next. Because what comes next is the part that should concern you most. Let's start at the beginning, and the beginning is more explosive than you might think. Iran's missile program has been a slow, burning fuse for decades. Since the 1980s, when the Islamic Republic first began acquiring Soviet-era Scud missiles during the Iran-Iraq War, Tehran has never stopped reaching for greater range, greater payload, greater lethality. But for most of those decades, the world watched and issued warnings and slapped on sanctions and assumed the fuse would never quite reach the powder keg. That assumption just got shattered, because the missile Iran launched is not a refinement of old technology. It is a generational leap, a statement of ambition wrapped in steel and rocket fuel, and its implications extend far beyond anything a simple news headline can contain. Here is what we know about the missile itself, and pay close attention because these details matter enormously. The projectile in question belongs to Iran's advanced ballistic missile family, a category of weapon designed not just to strike a target, but to penetrate modern missile defense systems, the very systems that Israel, Saudi Arabia, and American forces in the region rely on for protection. Intelligence assessments suggest this missile carries a payload capacity and a range profile that fundamentally changes the threat calculus in the region. We are talking about a weapon capable of reaching not just Israel, not just Saudi Arabia, but potentially striking targets well beyond the traditional boundaries of Iran's previously acknowledged reach. When defense analysts speak of a game changer, they use that phrase carefully. This time, they are not being cautious. This time, the phrase fits. And here is where it gets even more unsettling, because the timing of this launch was not accidental. Nothing in Iranian military strategy ever is. Iran did not fire this missile on a quiet Tuesday because its engineers happened to finish the final bolt tightening that morning. The timing was calculated with the precision of a chess grandmaster making a move that forces every other player on the board to react. Consider the geopolitical landscape at this exact moment. Diplomatic tensions between Iran and the West have been escalating for months. Nuclear negotiations have stalled in ways that suggest both sides have quietly given up on a peaceful resolution. Regional proxy conflicts, from Yemen to Lebanon to Iraq, have been intensifying, And Iran's strategic relationships with Russia and China have deepened in ways that give Tehran a level of confidence it has never previously enjoyed on the world stage. This missile launch did not happen in a vacuum. It happened at the precise intersection of all these pressures, and that intersection is where wars are born. Stay with me, because what I am about to tell you next is something that the standard defense briefings almost never acknowledge publicly. The most dangerous aspect of Iran's missile advancement is not the missile itself. The most dangerous aspect is what the missile represents about Iran's broader military doctrine. For years, Western intelligence operated under a working assumption that Iran's missile program was primarily a deterrent, a defensive shield designed to make any military strike against Tehran so costly that potential adversaries would think twice. That assumption built a certain kind of strategic stability into the region. Uncomfortable stability, but stability nonetheless. What this launch suggests, and what several senior defense officials are now wrestling with behind closed doors, is that Iran's doctrine may be shifting from deterrence to something more assertive, more offensive, more willing to demonstrate capability, not as a warning, but as a declaration. And declarations of this magnitude demand responses. The United States military, which maintains substantial forces throughout the Middle East, has already begun reassessing its regional posture in light of this development. American defense officials confirmed that surveillance systems tracked the launch in real time, a reminder that while Iran was demonstrating power, Western intelligence was watching every second of it, gathering data, measuring burn rates and trajectory angles and terminal velocity. That data is now being fed into targeting systems, into interceptor calibration programs, into the kind of classified war gaming that happens in basement rooms of the Pentagon that most of us will never hear about until 30 years later when the documents are declassified. Right now, in real time, the American military machine is doing what it always does in moments like this. It is adapting, recalculating, and preparing. But preparation takes time, and time is the one resource that seems to be running out. Here is a fact that should stop you cold. Modern ballistic missiles of the class Iran just tested travel at speeds that outpace most conventional interception systems. The window between launch detection and potential impact, depending on the target distance, can be measured in minutes, not hours. Minutes. That is the reality of modern missile warfare. That is the environment in which Israel's Iron Dome, the American TH-80 system, and Patriot missile batteries are now being asked to operate. These are sophisticated, battle-proven systems, but they were not designed for infinite capacity. They have reload times. They have coverage gaps. They have the fundamental limitation of any defensive system, which is that a determined, well-resourced adversary can study those gaps and design weapons specifically to exploit them. Iran has been studying those gaps for 20 years. And this missile, this most powerful missile in Iranian history, reflects everything they have learned. Are you beginning to understand why military analysts are not sleeping well right now? Let's talk about the international reaction, because it tells you something crucial about where this crisis is heading. Israel's response was immediate and pointed. Senior Israeli defense officials stated publicly that Iran's missile development represents a direct existential threat, language that Israel does not deploy casually. When Israel uses the word existential, it is drawing on a national memory forged in the Holocaust, hardened through 7 decades of wars fought on its borders and sometimes inside them. Existential is not a rhetorical flourish in Israeli strategic vocabulary. It is a trigger word. It is the word that precedes action. And Israeli Prime Minister's office issued statements that, when read carefully by anyone fluent in the language of military diplomacy, suggest that the window for purely diplomatic responses is narrowing. Meanwhile, the United Kingdom and European allies issued coordinated condemnations, firm in language, careful in their specificity. Britain's Ministry of Defense confirmed it is reviewing its regional commitments in light of the escalating missile threat. France and Germany, both deeply invested in preserving whatever remains of the Iran nuclear deal framework, found themselves in the uncomfortable position of condemning the very nation they have been trying to diplomatically engage. That tension between engagement and condemnation is one of the defining fault lines of modern Western foreign policy, and Iran knows how to exploit it masterfully. And Russia, China, they watched. They issued carefully worded statements calling for calm and dialogue. They did not condemn, they did not express alarm, and their silence spoke louder than any official communique ever could. Because here is the geopolitical reality that changes everything about how we must understand this moment. Iran is not operating alone. It has not been operating alone for years. The deepening military and economic partnership between Tehran and Moscow, accelerated dramatically by Russia's war in Ukraine and the sanctions isolation that followed, has given Iran access to technical knowledge, diplomatic cover, and a sense of strategic protection that it previously lacked. The relationship between Iran and China, while more transactional in nature, provides Tehran with economic lifelines that blunt the impact of Western sanctions and reduce Iran's incentive to return to the negotiating table. This is not the Iran of 2015, when the nuclear deal was signed, and Iran desperate for sanctions relief, willing to accept constraints in exchange for economic breathing room. This is an Iran that has found alternative partners, alternative revenue streams, and an alternative vision of its place in a world it increasingly sees as moving away from American dominance. That vision is what this missile represents. Not just a weapon, a worldview, and that worldview is spreading. In Riyadh, Saudi defense planners are running scenarios they would never have publicly acknowledged 2 years ago. In Abu Dhabi, Emirati officials who signed the Abraham Accords and cautiously opened channels to Israel are now watching that regional realignment face its most serious stress test. And a government perpetually caught between its Iranian neighbor and its American security guarantors finds itself once again squeezed by forces it cannot control. The entire architecture of Middle Eastern security, painfully, imperfectly constructed over decades of American engagement, is vibrating under the pressure of what Iran just demonstrated. Now let me tell you something that very few outlets are reporting, because it requires connecting dots that are uncomfortable to connect. The specific technical characteristics of Iran's newest missile suggest a level of engineering sophistication that cannot be explained entirely by organic Iranian development. The propulsion systems, the guidance packages, the materials science involved in constructing a missile of this size and capability, these point to external assistance. They point to technology transfer of a kind that has been taking place in the shadows of the Russia-Iran relationship and the broader realignment of anti-Western powers. What we are witnessing is not simply Iranian ambition. We are witnessing the product of a new axis of military cooperation, one that is patient, strategic, and operating on a timeline that extends far beyond any single election cycle in the United States or Europe. This is the context that matters. This is what makes the launch of a single missile into something that carries the weight of a historical inflection point. But let's return to the human stakes, because it is easy in the world of missile trajectories and geopolitical analysis to lose sight of what all of this means for real people. There are American service members stationed throughout the Middle East right now, in Qatar, in Bahrain, in Kuwait, in Jordan, in Iraq, who woke up this morning knowing that the threat environment around them just changed in a fundamental way. There are Israeli families in cities across that small, remarkable country who have lived their entire lives within range of Iranian missiles and who watch this news with the particular kind of dread that only comes from knowing the threat is not theoretical. There are people in Yemen, in Lebanon, in Syria whose lives are already shaped by proxy conflicts that trace their origins directly back to Iranian regional strategy, people for whom the violence is not breaking news, but daily reality. And there are people watching this video right now in London, in Chicago, in Toronto, in Berlin, who might wonder what any of this has to do with them. And to those people, I want to speak directly for a moment. The world is more interconnected than at any point in human history. The price of oil moves when Middle Eastern stability shifts. Global supply chains thread through the waters of the Persian Gulf. The diplomatic frameworks that govern nuclear non-proliferation, the agreements that stand between the current world and a world where nuclear weapons become routine tools of statecraft, are under pressure of a kind not seen since the Cold War. When Iran fires its most powerful missile in history, it is not just firing at a regional adversary. It is firing at a rules-based international order that, for all its flaws and hypocrisies, has kept the major powers from going to war with each other for 80 years. That order is fragile. It always has been. And missiles like this one make it more fragile. Here is what the next 30 to 60 days are likely to bring based on historical patterns and current intelligence assessments. Israel will intensify its covert operations against Iranian military infrastructure, operations that have already included the targeted assassination of missile scientists, cyber attacks on nuclear facilities, and strikes against Iranian assets in Syria. These operations will escalate in frequency and ambition. The United States will conduct additional military deployments to the region, described publicly as routine reassurance measures, but understood by everyone involved as a direct response to the missile launch. Diplomatic channels will be busy but quiet, with back-channel communications between Washington and Tehran attempting to establish some floor beneath which escalation will not be permitted to fall. And Iran, emboldened by the international reaction to this demonstration, will continue its program, testing, refining, preparing. The missile that was fired today is not the last missile. It is the beginning of a new chapter, and new chapters in the history of military competition have a way of ending in one of two ways, either through the painful, unglamorous work of diplomacy and deterrence, or through conflict that nobody planned for and everybody should have prevented. Right now, we are at the fork in the road. The decisions made in the next weeks and months in Washington, in Tel Aviv, in Tehran, in Moscow, in Brussels, will determine which path the world takes. And those decisions will be made by human beings operating under pressure with incomplete information in political environments that reward aggression and punish patience. That is always the most dangerous moment, not when the missiles are flying, but in the silence before, when everyone is calculating whether to cross the line. We are living in that silence right now. What does this mean for you specifically as someone trying to understand a world that seems to be accelerating towards something none of us can quite name? It means paying attention, not the kind of passive attention that scrolls past headlines, the kind of active, informed attention that understands context, that asks why now and why this and what next. It means resisting the temptation to treat this as entertainment, as geopolitical drama designed to fill airtime. It means recognizing that the events unfolding in that desert region are not distant and abstract, but immediate and real and consequential for the kind of world we will all be living in 5 years from now. The missile Iran fired is already in the history books. What happens next is still being written, and what happens next depends, in ways both large and small, on whether enough people are paying close enough attention to hold their governments accountable, to demand real strategy rather than political performance, to insist on the hard, unglamorous work of preventing the kind of catastrophic miscalculation that history is full of and that we can never quite seem to learn from. I have spent 15 years studying the language of military conflict, the cold mathematics of capability assessments, the psychological dynamics of deterrence theory, the human catastrophe that lies at the end of every escalation spiral. And what I can tell you, with every bit of that experience behind me, is this moment matters, this launch matters. The response to it matters, not just to the governments and generals who will make the formal decisions, but to every one of us who will live with the consequences. Do not look away. Do not let this story become background noise. Do not allow the 24-hour news cycle to normalize something that should shake us into alertness. Iran has drawn a new line with this missile. The world must now decide how to respond. And you, sitting wherever you are right now, are part of that world. Your attention, your awareness, your demand for serious analysis rather than shallow coverage, it all contributes to the pressure on those in power to act wisely rather than recklessly. Stay locked in, stay informed, stay vigilant, because the next development in this story, and there will be one sooner than any of us would like, will matter just as much as this one. And when it comes, you need to be ready to understand it in full context, not just in headlines. The countdown that began in that Iranian desert has not ended. It has simply moved to the next phase. And the world is watching, whether it knows it or not. This is not the time to look away. This is the time to lean in. Stay alert, stay sharp, and we will see you in the next one.